Welcome to part 3 of the Family Peace Initiatives Masterclass in BIP Facilitation and our conversation with Michelle McCormick, the Executive Director of the Kansas Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence. I tell you, Dorothy and I could have talked with Michelle easily for several more hours. It was such an energetic and fun conversation to be able to spend time with her again. Michelle has so many accomplishments throughout her history as a victim advocate, and it's such a thrill that she was able to spend the time that she did just sharing some of her experience. Here's part 3, and thank you all for listening to the Masterclass in BIP Facilitation. Here's Michelle.
Obviously it felt like a really important opportunity to me to get to go work with Dorothy at the Attorney General's office, and I didn't really know what it was going to mean, but basically she was, as she said, was really charged with helping to strengthen battering intervention in Kansas, and she had done so much work on, what would be sort of these ideal standards at that time for the state, but they hadn't been formalized as a sort of the state adopting them. And so our journey together was to really assess what was going on around the state for programs outside of the one Family Peace Initiative that I had worked in, but with all the programs that we knew had existed or existing at that time, and what were they doing? What kind of practices were they incorporating? What kind of training were they getting? So it began. We went through what is a really fun process of getting legislation passed and regulations written. And but I think I'm super proud of that work that we did. We in many ways we co-authored with the consultant the state's domestic violence offender assessment, which is used in Kansas courts and now has been used for 10 years probably or more. Yeah. And just so much learning and helping. We did more training across the state to more disciplines. It was such an important time for me of learning and getting experience of sort of the administrative side, policy development, that kind of stuff, but also still being very much tied to the impact of what's happening in BIPs in Kansas. And so, and for victims and survivors, of course. So there we were in the AG's office, and trying to create change in the state and really provide support for Kansas BIP programs. That, of course, is what we had hoped to do, is create the kind of structure so that folks could get good training, good technical assistance, that they had kind of an idea about what the goal was that they were shooting for in their programs. And I mean, to be frank, also, there were some real problematic things happening in the state at that time in some programs, and we needed to address that so that those practices there were harmful practices that didn't continue. So
when I think of that, Michelle, one of the things that strikes me is in those early months of your taking on that position, you were really handed a big responsibility. There were virtually no battering intervention programs across the state. And those that were there were some that were one-day programs. There was quite an array of differences, but overall, I think there were only like 3 that were trying to follow the essential elements and standards. And in your time there, I think it was like, 7 years? The development across the state of battering intervention programs was just really profound. And I'm wondering, when you think about that development, because I see other states in that dilemma as well. And I think there are things that can be learned from your experiences there. And in some of the things that you've been describing, there are some who weren't holding the participants accountable at all. There were others that were on the other side of the spectrum, and all they were interested in was challenging everything that the participant was walking into the group with. And your job was to work with both of those to get them to be effective.
But yeah, it was a challenge to get the providers, no matter where they were at, kind of on that continuum, to elevate their programming. But I think, to give you all some credit around this, many of our providers started in those early days choosing to adopt the FPI curriculum. And some of that was they found it more accessible. Like, let's be real about it, right? Some of them found it more financially accessible. They could get to your trainings without having to travel to across the country, some stuff like that. But also, they were going to the training and they were coming back, and people were coming back going, whoa. And even when I was the director of the local victim advocacy program, when our advocates would come to the training, people would say that was the best training I've ever been to, frequently. And having to walk the talk, if you will, is varying degrees of hard for some people. And but providers in our state were routinely calling me and saying, even as the BIP coordinator position, and saying things like, "This is incredible. This is incredible." And so, they were finding meaning in the work they were doing in a different way. And that really is a testament to the hard questions you all were asking, the way you were helping them develop skills and an understanding of these issues in a more complex way. And they were seeing the results, like the impact was becoming just right up to the forefront for them. So had that not been the approach that you all had taught me, I'm not sure I would have navigated sort of the reality, of my sister who was killed by her intimate partner in 2005. I don't know that I could have stayed in the work. I certainly don't know that I could have done BIP or had been involved in strengthening BIP if I hadn't learned so much about managing myself being my responsibility in those processes, and how that was super, super important in a lot of ways in my overall health and wellness and resiliency and navigating that difficulty. But I probably would have to have, I don't know, I would have probably gone and opened a tiki bar on a beach somewhere. Had I not, I just certainly don't think I could have stayed in the work, even to doing the work in victim advocacy, had I not been really benefiting from some of those lessons of managing myself, and what lessons do I have to learn about myself, and what does it feel like to be asked, these really deeply personal questions about, well, what does that say about you if you're having that reaction and that kind of thing, and learning that, like, what's now kind of Brene Brown famous, that there is courage and vulnerability or whatever. But really truly learning that in a way that was just so real that it isn't just like a platitude to me. I really developed, I know that I could help the men in group who maybe wouldn't normally trust me to help them, by creating trust through my own vulnerability. And so, it's a very, very powerful lesson that I hope a lot of folks have walked away with. So,
I don't know if you remember this, Michelle, but first of all, if you had a tiki bar someplace out there, I'd be happy to show up at your tiki bar. That'd be amazing.
That's the
Uh,
retirement plan.
But I have this memory, and I don't remember exactly the conversation, but I think that I was teaching you how to apply the shadow message to stuff. And I remember that we'd like gone across the street at the YWCA and sat under a little awning or a little, at a picnic table. And do you remember that conversation?
Oh yeah, because I was so activated by the
Mm,
questions, which of course was the point I think you were trying to express, right?
mhm,
Like where does that come from, and what does that say about you, and how has that shown up in your life, and that kind of stuff.
yeah.
And that was the first time I think you had introduced the shadow concepts to
Mhm,
me. And it was so like, I don't know, raw. It was just such an unhealed sort of place for me. And then doing that kind of work and inviting that kind of work and introspection. And of course, I then wasn't doing that in the group room for myself. I was like, wait, I've got some work to do.
mhm.
But then I spent like the whole next year, like going to people in my life, like, and saying like, hey, do you remember that time that
Uh,
I like got so mad because of X, Y, and Z? Like, here's what was going on, and I need to be accountable to you for it.
mm,
And like friends and family members and people are going, what are you talking? I don't even remember what you're talking about, right? But like I remembered, I knew I needed to be accountable.
mhm,
And that just being so pivotal. And I'll share with you, like not only kind of was that super key to me in all kinds of like personal ways, but that information has been so incredibly valuable to me as a supervisor.
uh,
And like I have absolutely incorporated some of the strategies about, when I'm asking a team member who's brought a difficult situation forward, and they'll share like, well, and this person was saying this and they were doing this to me and they were doing that, and I'll hear all of that out, and then I'll also sort of go like, well, now what part of this is your stuff? And they're like, huh? you know, and I'm like,
yeah.
well, is it possible that the other person has a different interpretation, but like the way, you're not responsible for what they said to you, but you're responsible for how you hear it,
Mhm,
is how I've kind of taken the message. And I do that a lot when we're talking about
yeah.
workplace communication,
Mhm,
is like, yes, they're saying something and they have the responsibility to use courtesy and respect and whatever. And what are you filtering it through? Like, and that, what do you own in that? And because, side note, that's what you are in control of, right? And that's where you can really make a big impact. And this isn't something to feel bad about. This is a place of where actually you can be empowered with this information. And so I use that a lot in my supervision of staff and team members, and which is, I'm super mindful of the fact that I probably 75% of my staff are survivors.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they are coming forward with their own experiences in this work.
Yeah.
And I think I have a responsibility sort of organizationally to set up our environment so that they can thrive here, because I believe and I'm committed to survivor leaders being a part of our field.
Mhm,
And I have to ask them to manage themselves in these processes and be
mhm,
responsible for that. And so I've used these concepts just in so many important ways. When I describe that as a management or a supervisory strategy, people go, great. That is being trauma informed. That's what everyone needs in their workplace, right? But like they bristle at it being applied
yeah.
in an intervention program.
Yeah.
I'm like, come on, it just doesn't feel like so different. And I get why. I don't know. I just, in my mind, it has been a mistake to, it feels like that, what I described as that one-dimensional thing. Like we've in some ways dehumanized the folks who come to abuse intervention programs. And if we do that, how are we behaving any differently than maybe they have?
Mm,
And, I just, that is such a, I think that that's just such a common thread that I've heard a lot of survivors talk about, right? About like the impact of emotional abuse and being belittled, is that they felt less than. And I'm like, but how could we go into a group room and treat people as if they're less than, and not be completely out of integrity with what we're trying to accomplish? And so it seems clear to me, but I know that the concerns that people have around that being misused as a justification, and there do have to be guardrails to make sure sort of these some of those some of those barriers don't slide into collusion or what have you. But with those guardrails in place, like there is just so much power in taking that trauma-informed approach. And again, I'll stand by the fact that I think survivors demand this of us. I think when they tell us what they want, and they want safety in relationships, and they want their children, who they know are going to continue to engage with their significant other in many cases, to be safe, like it demands that we do our absolute level best to help somebody be safe in those relationships. And so I would argue that a trauma-informed approach with those who cause harm is survivor-centered.
Man, I'm thinking, you could easily be talking about so many of the dumb things that I've done over the years, thinking that I was doing good for people, and so the painful process of learning, and how cool it is to be able to have mentors like you, like Dorothy, just surround us with people who have these radars to help us to stay in our lanes the best we can. That I think one of the biggest, and I know you talked about this earlier, I just wanted to try to maybe flesh this out, is that, I think that the relationships between battery intervention programs and the shelter programs, the state coalitions, is I would describe it as weak at best. There are some really great examples around the country of it working beautifully, but overall, I don't see it at the level that I dream it to be, that I think that we dream it to be. And do you have any ideas on how that could be strengthened between the advocacy world and the intervention world?
Yeah, I think it's important. This often sort of funnels down to the scarce resources that are devoted to the work that we all do. And I think it's important for us to remember that, like, if we're feeling kind of pushed down by a system that's not resourcing our work as well, it doesn't benefit anyone for us to push at each other. Instead, we should unite and sort of push up and demand better supports. That's important to me. It's one of the things I would suggest to anybody in any other state who's working on their state level response and support for BIP, is the one thing to not emulate about the state of Kansas is that we brought the requirements and the standards and all of the structure forward, and then still to this day don't allocate resources to BIPs, which is just absolutely problematic. And as the coalition director, I have brought it up at the legislature. I have raised that concern. Certainly, our victim advocacy programs can't afford to lose any of the resources that are devoted to us. And so it does mean asking for additional money that's outside of that. But I am fully in support of that happening and have tried to ask for that, and will continue to ask for that, because I think that's a critical component. But how powerful is it if I am asking for resources for your programming and BIPs line up, in support of the public policy change that we're asking for survivors, and if we have each other and we collaborate in those ways, I think having that unified sort of approach is really important.